The Force binds all things across the galaxy, connecting every living being in an invisible web of energy that stretches from the molten core of Mustafar to the ice fields of Hoth. But even the Force, in all its vastness, had never touched something that did not belong to it at all, something that came from a galaxy so far removed that the very stars burned differently in its sky. No hyperspace signature registered. No astromech chirped a warning. There was simply a tear, a searing wound in the fabric of reality itself, blooming silently above the war-torn skies of Presentland, a mid-rim world caught in the grinding machinery of the Clone Wars. Republic. Gunships screamed through smoke-choked air, harried by separatist vulture droids, while below, the streets of the capital burned. Clone troopers dug into shattered Durasteel barricades as a wall of B-2 super battle droids advanced, their photoreceptors gleaming red through the haze. This was not a battle anyone was winning. It was a battle everyone was losing slowly. The way wars are lost, one soldier at a time. If you want to see more characters enter the Star Wars galaxy, hit that subscribe button and drop the name of a character you'd want to see in the comments below. May the Force be with you. The tear widened, and for a heartbeat the sky itself seemed to scream, light bending and folding around a single falling shape, a man, cape snapping violently in winds that shouldn't have existed, plummeting from a hole in reality no sensor had detected and no Jedi had foreseen. He struck the Earth not as debris strikes it, but as a comet does, sending a shockwave rolling outward that flattened a line of advancing droids like grass. Beneath a giant's footstep, clone troopers ducked instinctively, weapons raised, waiting for the smoke to clear and reveal whatever new horror the war had produced. What it revealed instead was a man standing in the center of the crater, dust settling around him, a red cape falling still against his shoulders. Superman. He did not know where he was. Moments ago, he had been locked in a desperate struggle above Metropolis, chasing down a cosmic anomaly that had torn open space itself, and now the ground beneath his boots was alien. The sky above him bruised with two suns instead of one, and the sounds around him were the unmistakable, universal language of war. He heard the screams first, then the blaster fire. His body responded before his mind had caught up, some instinct older than thought pulling him toward the sound of people in danger. A squad of clone troopers, pinned behind a collapsed transport, were seconds from being overrun. Superman moved. He crossed the distance in a blur that no sensor, no droid processor, could track, faster than blaster bolts, faster than thought. He placed himself between the troopers and the advancing line of droids, and for one suspended moment, nothing happened. The droids' targeting systems recalculated. The clones stared, rifles lowered in confusion at the stranger in blue and red who had simply appeared from nowhere. Then Superman moved through the droid line like a force of nature given human shape. He did not use heat vision at first. Some old instinct told him to test the limits of this strange place before unleashing his full arsenal. A punch sent a B-2 unit crumpling into three others behind it. He caught a volley of blaster fire against his chest, felt it sting in a way bullets never had, a strange resonance that made his teeth ache, but he did not fall. He did not even slow down. Within 90 seconds, the droid advance that had been grinding forward for 6 hours lay in ruins, and the clone troopers of Battalion 7 stood in stunned silence, staring at the man responsible. Commander Ridge, a battle-scarred clone with a scar across his brow plate, lowered his rifle slowly. What are you?" Before Superman could answer, the ground trembled again, not from artillery this time, but from something else. A blue-skinned Jedi Knight, robes scorched and lightsaber still humming in her hand, pushed through the wreckage, her eyes wide with something between alarm and awe. Jedi Knight Anli. Voss had felt it the moment the being arrived, not through the Force exactly, but as an absence within it, a strange gap in the web of energy she had spent her whole life learning to read. It was as if the Force itself did not know what to make of this stranger, could not decide whether he was a miracle or an intrusion. "You're not native to this galaxy," she said, not as a question but a realization, studying him with the careful eyes of someone who had faced Sith Lords and monsters alike, but had never encountered anything quite like this. Superman turned to face her, his expression a careful mask over the chaos churning beneath it. Twin suns overhead. Strange, cold weapons that stung like nothing on Earth. Soldiers wearing identical faces beneath their helmets. Clones. He would soon learn, bred for a war they never chose. Everything about this place screamed wrongness. And yet the desperation in these people's eyes was achingly, painfully familiar. "My name is Clark," he said, offering the only truth he had left to hold on to in a galaxy that had none of his own. "I don't know how I got here, but you needed help, and I was able to give it. That's usually where I start." Anli studied him a moment longer, then sheathed her lightsaber, not fully trusting him, but not treating him as an enemy either. "Then you'd better come with me," she said. "Because where you landed, Master Clark, is the middle of a war that doesn't end kindly for anyone standing still." Overhead, the twin suns of Presentland beat down against a sky still smoking from battle. And somewhere far above the atmosphere, in the cold quiet of space, a separatist listening post had already begun, transmitting a very interesting report to Count Dooku himself. Word of what happened at Presentland spread through the Republic's command channels faster than any official report could contain it. Within hours, grainy helmet cam footage reached the Jedi Temple on Coruscant, footage of a single figure in blue and red tearing through a droid line that should have taken an entire company to break. Jedi Masters gathered around hollow projectors in hushed clusters, watching the impossible over and over, searching for wires, for tricks, for some rational explanation their centuries of galactic knowledge could provide. They found none. On the ground, in the ruins of Presentland's capital, Superman was learning the true shape of the war he'd fallen into. Anli Voss led him through the makeshift command post that had been carved into the basement of a collapsed government building, past rows of wounded clones being treated by overworked medics, past young soldiers, no older, embodied in their mid-20s despite being only a decade old, themselves staring at him with a mixture of hope and disbelief. He felt their eyes on him the way he'd felt the eyes of Metropolis on his worst days. Except here there was no history of trust to draw upon. He was a stranger wearing a stranger's face, and yet somehow, impossibly, he was already being treated as a symbol. "You saved 43 men today," Anli said quietly as they walked. "Battalion 7 would have been wiped out in another 10 minutes. I've seen Jedi Masters who couldn't have done what you did out there." "I didn't do anything special," Superman said, and meant it. "I just did what needed doing." Anli gave him a measured look, the kind that suggested she'd heard humility from powerful men before, and had learned to be wary of it. "That's a dangerous kind of thinking to have in a war, Master Clark. The moment you believe you're just doing what needs doing, you stop asking whether it should be done at all." Her words landed harder than she likely intended. Superman said nothing, but the observation settled into him like a splinter he couldn't quite work free. They reached the command post's central chamber, where General Ord Rakuan, a grizzled, basilisk Jedi Master with 4 arms and a face carved by decades of war, stood over a holotable displaying the battle lines. He looked up as they entered, his 4 eyes narrowing with the particular scrutiny of a man who had survived too many surprises to trust a new one easily. "So this is our miracle," Rakuan said, voice a low rumble. "Tell me, stranger, can you be relied upon? Or was today a fluke born of desperation and good timing?" "I don't know your war," Superman answered honestly. "I don't know your factions, your politics, or why children are wearing the same face and carrying rifles into battle. But I know what I saw today. People who needed help and droids trying to kill them. I helped. If that's not enough for you, I understand. But I'm not looking to be relied upon as a weapon. I'm looking to understand what's happening here and to do what's right while I figure out how to get home." Rakuan's 4 eyes studied him for a long moment. Around the chamber, clone officers exchanged glances, uncertain, cautiously hopeful. The basilisk had commanded soldiers for 3 years of grinding war, had watched good men die for territory that changed hands twice before the bodies were even counted. He recognized conviction when he heard it, even from an alien in an alien uniform. "The Separatists will send everything they have once they understand what you are," Rakuan said finally. "Grievous doesn't tolerate embarrassment, and Count Dooku collects anomalies like other men collect trophies. If you stay, You paint a target on this entire system. Then maybe I should leave, Superman said. I don't want to be the reason more people die. Or, Anley interjected, stepping forward, you could be the reason fewer people die. President has held for 6 months against overwhelming odds. Today, for the first time, we didn't just hold, we won. That's not nothing, Clark. The name still felt strange in this galaxy's air. Stripped of everything that made it his. No Daily Planet, no Lois. No Metropolis skyline to return to at the end of the day. Just a war with 2 suns burning overhead and a decision that felt suddenly, terrifyingly permanent. He thought of the clone troopers he'd pulled from beneath collapsed Durasteel, their identical faces slack with exhaustion and relief. He thought of the droids, soulless machines, easy to fight without moral cost, until Anley had quietly mentioned that some organic, separatist soldiers fought and died in the same trenches. Nothing here was as clean as the battles he was used to. There was no simple villain to punch, no clear line between right and wrong drawn in primary colors. I'll stay, he said finally. Not as a soldier, not as a weapon for your republic, but I won't stand by while people are dying. And I won't leave a fight I could have prevented. Those are my terms. Rakuan exhaled slowly through his lower mouth, something that might have been the basilisk equivalent of a tired smile. A being who saves an entire battalion and still insists on setting terms. You'll fit in poorly here. Master Clark. The galaxy tends to grind such convictions down to something more practical. Then I'll be the first thing that doesn't grind down, Superman said quietly. Outside, the twin suns began their slow descent toward the horizon, painting the ruined skyline in hues of orange and red, not so different. He realized with a pang of unexpected homesickness from a sunset over Metropolis. But this galaxy had its own war, its own grief, its own impossible math of survival. And somewhere above the atmosphere, in the dark between stars, Count Dooku had already begun making plans for the stranger who refused to be anyone's weapon. The first sign that something was wrong came 3 days later, during a routine patrol along Presentland's northern perimeter. Superman had spent those days learning the rhythms of the Republic garrison, the way clone troopers organized themselves into tight-knit squads that functioned like brotherhoods, the way General Rakuan balanced tactical brilliance against a bone-deep weariness that seemed to live behind his 4 eyes. The way Anley Voss meditated each morning in the ruins of a bombed-out temple garden, trying to make sense of a force that seemed to whisper contradictions. Whenever she reached toward him, he had helped rebuild a water purification station, had pulled 3 clones from a collapsed tunnel after a droid artillery strike, had even found a strange comfort in the simple physical labor of hauling debris, alongside soldiers who never once asked him to explain himself twice. But on the 3rd morning, reaching down to lift a fallen support beam from atop a trapped medic, his hands had gone through it like it was made of smoke. He stared at his own fingers in confusion, flexing them, watching dust motes drift undisturbed through the space where solid Durasteel should have resisted him. The medic beneath the beam cried out, and Superman, heart hammering, with a fear he hadn't felt since he was a boy first discovering the strange things his body could do, tried again. This time his hands connected, and he hauled the beam free with his usual ease, tossing it aside as though it weighed nothing. But his pulse didn't stop racing. Something had happened. Something impossible, in a place already defined by impossibility. He found Anley that evening, sitting cross-legged atop a shattered comm tower, watching the twin suns bleed color into the horizon. I need to ask you something, he said, settling beside her with more caution than he'd shown all week. And I need you to be honest, because I don't understand what's happening to me. She turned, studying his face with the quiet attentiveness that had become familiar to him. Tell me. He explained it as best he could. The flickering strength. Moments where his skin felt invulnerable, as always, and moments where it didn't. A strange building pressure behind his eyes that reminded him uncomfortably of heat vision building, without his permission, threatening to release itself in ways he couldn't fully control. He explained, too, the growing exhaustion, a fatigue utterly foreign to a body that hadn't truly tired in over a decade. Anley was quiet for a long moment, her gaze drifting upward to the twin suns now dipping below the ruined skyline. On my homeworld, she said slowly, We're taught that every living thing draws strength from somewhere. The force, sunlight, the bonds between people. You've told me your powers come from your sun. A single, yellow sun from a galaxy far from this one. Yes. Then perhaps that's your answer. This is not your galaxy. These are not your suns. She gestured toward the horizon, where twin orbs of different color and intensity had already begun to set. One a hot white gold, the other a duller amber, casting long double shadows across the ruined city. Your body may still be learning how to draw strength from light that isn't the light it evolved beneath. Too much energy in one moment, not enough in the next. It would explain what you're describing, not weakness. Exactly, but imbalance. The words settled uncomfortably in Superman's chest. He had spent his entire adult life as a fixed point, a certainty that people could build their trust around, that Lois could rely on, that Metropolis could sleep soundly beneath. The idea that his body was now a variable, an equation still solving itself, was more frightening than any villain he had faced. How long, he asked, until it stabilizes? I don't know, Anley admitted. I've never encountered anything like you before. No Jedi has. But if I were to guess based on what little I understand of the Force's relationship to living things, I'd say it will take time. Your body relearning what strength means beneath a sky that isn't yours. That night, unable to sleep, Superman rose into the air above Presentland's ruined skyline, testing himself in the privacy of darkness where no one could see if he failed. He pushed toward the upper atmosphere, chasing the last light of the setting suns the way he might once have chased a sunset over the Pacific, seeking any point of familiarity in an alien sky. For a moment, catching direct light from the white gold sun, he felt something surge through him, power, sharper and stranger than his usual strength, almost too much, like drinking from a fire hose. Then the light faded, and the power guttered with it, leaving him hovering uncertainly above a world of strangers, uncertain of his own limits for the first time since he was a teenager. He thought of Krypton, a world he'd never known, whose destruction had made him what he was. He thought of Earth, whose yellow sun had been a constant, unquestioned gift his entire life. And he thought, with a clarity that ached, that perhaps every world he touched would eventually reveal some fracture in the foundation he'd built his identity upon, that Superman was not an immutable truth, but a relationship between a body and a star. And here, beneath two strange suns, that relationship was still being written. Below him, unseen in the ruins, a comm relay flickered to life, carrying an encrypted separatist transmission toward a Trade Federation cruiser in high orbit, a report confirming what Count Dooku had suspected. Since the first grainy footage reached his desk, the stranger's power was not constant. It could be measured, timed, and exploited. Somewhere in the void above Presentland, the hunt had already begun. Count Dooku arrived at Presentland not with an invasion fleet, but with a single unmarked shuttle and an escort of two separatist commando droids, a display of restraint calculated for exactly the effect it produced. When General Rakuan's scanners flagged the vessel descending through the atmosphere under a flag of parley, the entire garrison braced for a trap. What they got instead was a former Jedi Master, silver-haired and impeccably composed, stepping onto the ash-strewn landing pad as though he were arriving at a diplomatic gala rather than a war zone. I have not come to fight, Dooku announced to the clone troopers who leveled their rifles at him. I have come to speak with your new ally. I suspect he'll find the conversation more illuminating than another firefight. Rakuan wanted to refuse outright. Every instinct honed by years of war screamed that this was separatist theater, a prelude to some devastating strike. But Superman, standing at the perimeter, felt something else entirely, a strange, magnetic curiosity to understand the man responsible for so much of the suffering he'd witnessed these past days. Against Amley's quiet objection, he agreed to the meeting, on the condition it take place in open ground, watched by a full company of troopers. They met in the shattered remains of what had once been Presentland's central plaza, twin suns casting long shadows between them. Dooku studied Superman with the unhurried attention of a man accustomed to being the most dangerous person in any room, an assumption he was visibly recalibrating in real time. You're not of this galaxy, Dooku said. It wasn't a question. I've read the reports. Strength beyond any Jedi's. Invulnerability the likes of which even Force techniques struggle to replicate. And yet, his eyes narrowed with genuine curiosity. Inconsistent. Fluctuating. You're still learning what you are here. I know what I am, Superman replied evenly. I'm still learning what this galaxy is. An honest answer. Refreshing. Dooku clasped his hands behind his back, beginning a slow circuit around the plaza's edge, forcing Superman to turn with him. Let me offer you a different education than the one General Rakuan and his Jedi companion have surely been providing. You've allied yourself with the Republic, a bureaucracy so riddled with corruption, so beholden to corporate interests and Senate graft, that it manufactures armies of slaves to fight its wars rather than ask its own citizens to bear the cost. Did young Master Voss mention that detail? That the soldiers you've been dying alongside were purchased, grown, and conditioned for obedience, denied the basic right of choice that you clearly hold so dear. The words landed with precision, striking a nerve Superman hadn't realized was so exposed. He thought of Commander Ridge, of the clone medics, of soldiers who spoke of the war with a resigned fatalism that had troubled him from his first day here. He'd asked Anley about it once, and her uncomfortable silence had told him more than any answer could have. I've noticed, Superman said carefully. It bothers me. But an imperfect ally fighting for something worthwhile isn't the same as no ally at all. What exactly are you offering instead? Trade Federation occupation? Corporate rule with droids instead of clones? I've seen what separatist forces do to civilian centers. I watched the footage from JBM before I ever set foot on this planet. Dooku's expression flickered, not quite surprise, but a recalculation. War is never clean, wherever it is fought. I won't insult you by pretending otherwise. But consider this. The separatist movement began as a response to Republic tyranny, to a Senate that ignored the outer systems until they had no choice but to seek independence. Whatever it has become, however grievous methods offend your sensibilities, the underlying grievance remains legitimate. You, of all beings, should recognize the danger of unchecked centralized power. Isn't that a philosophy your own world's mythology holds dear? A being who could topple an empire, choosing instead to prop one up. It was, Superman had to admit, a more sophisticated argument than he'd expected, not a crude appeal to darkness or power, but something closer to genuine ideological seduction, aimed precisely at the parts of him that distrusted unchecked authority. I'm not propping up anyone's empire, he said. I'm protecting people who are dying regardless of who's right in your war. That's not the same thing as an endorsement, isn't it? Dooku's voice sharpened slightly. Every battle you win for the Republic extends this war by weeks, months, prolongs the suffering of soldiers on both sides who never asked for this conflict. If you truly wished to minimize death, the fastest path would be a swift separatist victory, not a stalemate propped up by your intervention. Superman felt the weight of the argument settle uncomfortably against his convictions, the way Anley's earlier warning had. He was beginning to understand that this galaxy did not offer the clean moral geometry he was accustomed to, that every choice here cast a long, complicated shadow. I don't trust you, he said finally. Not because your argument is entirely wrong, but because I've seen what your droids do to civilians. And I don't believe a man willing to burn cities to prove a philosophical point about corruption is offering me anything but a different flavor of tyranny. Something cold moved behind Dooku's eyes, not anger, but the calm recalibration of a strategist encountering resistance. A pity. I'd hoped you might prove more perceptive than the Jedi. But convictions, however admirable, tend to erode under sufficient pressure. I look forward to discovering yours. He offered a final, courtly nod. We will speak again, Kal-El of Krypton. The name struck Superman like a physical blow. He hadn't spoken it to anyone in this galaxy, not once. As Dooku turned and walked calmly back toward his shuttle, unbothered by the 100 rifles trained on his back, Superman felt a chill that had nothing to do with the twin suns, sinking toward the horizon. Somewhere, somehow, the Separatists knew more about him than he'd ever revealed. The name echoed in Superman's mind long after Dooku's shuttle vanished into the twin sunset sky. Kal-El of Krypton, a name he hadn't spoken aloud since he was a boy learning the truth of his origins. from a crystalline console buried beneath the Arctic ice, a name that belonged to a world that no longer existed. Spoken now by a Sith Lord in a galaxy that shouldn't have known it at all. He found General Rakuan in the command chamber, already deep in conversation with Amley, both of them looking up with concern as he entered. "He knew my birth name," Superman said without preamble. "Not the name I gave you. My real name. From my homeworld." "How is that possible?" Rakuan's four eyes narrowed thoughtfully. "Count Dooku commands resources beyond conventional intelligence gathering. Separatist information networks span the galaxy. But this suggests something else. Something more troubling. The Force," Emily said quietly, and both men turned to her. "It's the only explanation I can think of. If your arrival created a disturbance, a ripple, however small, it's possible Dooku sensed something through the Force itself. Or worse." She hesitated. "There are those who believe the Force carries knowledge across all things it touches, given enough sensitivity to listen. A being trained in the dark side, hungry enough for power, might have reached further than either of us would like to imagine." The thought unsettled Superman more than any physical threat could have. He had spent his life protecting the boundary between his two identities, Clark Kent and Superman, precisely because that boundary protected the people he loved. Here, in a galaxy without Lois, without the Daily Planet, without anyone who might be endangered by the truth, the stakes felt different, yet no less unsettling. If something in this galaxy could reach into the deepest truths of his existence uninvited, what else might it uncover? What else might it use? It was Commander Ridge who found him later that night, sitting alone atop the ruined calm tower where he'd first confided his fears to Amley days before. The clone trooper climbed up without hesitation, settling beside him with the easy familiarity of a soldier, long past standing on ceremony with commanding officers, let alone alien strangers. "You look like a man carrying something heavy," Ridge said, helmet tucked under one arm, revealing a face marked by scars that told their own quiet history. "I am," Superman admitted. "Someone reached into a part of my life I thought was mine alone. It's unsettling, in a way I don't have good words for." Ridge was quiet for a moment, staring out at the ruined skyline. "You want to know unsettling? Try knowing you were grown in a tank on Kamino, decanted with a face and a voice and a set of instincts some scientist decided you should have, and a chip in your head some general could use to make you forget every choice you ever thought you made." He said it without bitterness, in the flat tone of a man who had made peace with an unbearable truth simply because there had been no alternative. "At least whatever Dooku knows about you, he had to work for it. Everything about me, I was handed before I ever took my first breath." The words hit Superman harder than Dooku's philosophical arguments ever could have. He had spent days growing steadily more troubled by what Amley had gently confirmed and what Ridge now stated plainly: an entire army of sentient beings, bred without consent, denied the fundamental dignity of choice, fighting and dying for a republic that treated their expendability as a strategic asset rather than a moral catastrophe. "Does it make you angry?" Superman asked, knowing that. "Sometimes," Ridge shrugged, though something tight moved behind the gesture. "Mostly I try not to think about it too hard. A man starts asking why he exists, why his brothers exist, why any of us are fighting a war none of us chose. That way lies madness. Or desertion. And desertion gets you shot by your own chain of command as a traitor to a cause you never agreed to serve in the first place." He looked over at Superman, something raw and searching in his expression. "You keep saying you won't be anyone's weapon. Good for you. You got the luxury of that choice. Most of us didn't." Superman said nothing for a long moment, the weight of Ridge's words settling into him alongside every other complication this galaxy had thrown at him. Dooku's uncomfortably persuasive rhetoric, Amley's warnings about conviction eroding under pressure, and now this, the quiet, devastating admission that the very soldiers he'd sworn to protect were themselves victims of a system he was fighting to preserve. "I can't fix everything wrong with this war," he said finally. "I don't have that kind of power, whatever Dooku thinks. But I can make sure the choices left to you and your brothers matter more, not less, because I'm here. I can't give you the freedom you should have had from the start, But I can make sure fewer of you die fighting for people who see you as disposable. Ridge studied him for a long moment, then offered a tired, genuine smile, the first Superman had seen from him. That's more than most give us credit for wanting. He rose, settling his helmet back under his arm. For what it's worth, sir, whatever Dooku knows about your past, it doesn't change what you did on that battlefield. Whoever you were before you fell out of the sky, you're something worth fighting alongside now. As Ridge climbed back down into the ruined city, Superman remained atop the tower a while longer, watching the twin suns finally vanish beneath the horizon, replaced by a canopy of unfamiliar stars. Somewhere among them, he knew, Count Dooku was already planning his next move, and somewhere far above the atmosphere, in the cold silence of deep space, a Trade Federation battle fleet had begun a slow, deliberate approach toward Presentland, drawn by the promise of a prize far greater than any single world. The Trade Federation fleet emerged from hyperspace above Presentland 3 days later, a wall of angular durasteel silhouettes blotting out the dimmer of the twin suns. Republic sensor arrays lit up with alarm across the garrison's command chamber, and General Rakuan's 4 eyes swept the tactical display with the grim calculation of a man counting losses before the battle had even begun. 6 Lucrehulk-class battleships, he reported, voice tight. Enough droid deployment capacity to overwhelm this garrison 100 times over. This isn't a probing action. This is Dooku making a statement. Superman stood at the edge of the holotable, watching the swarm of red icons multiply across the display, and felt something cold settle into his chest, not fear for himself, but the familiar, aching dread of a man who understood exactly what such numbers meant for the soldiers around him. He's not just trying to take the planet, he said quietly. He's testing me, trying to see what I'll do when the stakes are impossible to ignore. Then we should discuss what you will do, Rakuan said, turning to face him fully. Because if you fight alongside us, you become the single greatest tactical asset this garrison has ever possessed. And if you don't, I told you from the start I wasn't a weapon for your Republic to wield. Superman interrupted, though without heat. That hasn't changed. But I also told you I wouldn't stand by while people died in front of me. Those aren't contradictory positions, General. I'll fight. Not because the Republic commands it, but because 40,000 people on this planet are about to be slaughtered if I don't. Rakuan studied him for a long moment, then nodded, the closest thing to respect the weathered Beazelisk had shown him since their first meeting. Then let's discuss how a being who doesn't take orders intends to coordinate with an army that survives by following them. What followed was 3 hours of frantic strategic planning. Superman contributing a perspective no one in the chamber had ever considered, not the incremental tactics of ground war, but a broader, more instinctive grasp of how to disrupt an enemy's capacity to fight altogether. He proposed targeting the Lucrehulk battleship's core reactors directly rather than attempting to repel wave after wave of droid infantry, a strategy that would have been suicide for any conventional pilot, but was for a being who could survive the vacuum of space and punch through starship hull plating entirely within reach. You're proposing a one-man assault on 6 capital ships, Emily said, disbelief coloring her voice as the plan took shape. Clark, even accounting for everything I've seen you do, that's not impossible, Superman finished. Just difficult. And I won't be doing it alone. I need your garrison to draw droid deployment away from the ships. Primary defenses while I move between them. Coordinated timing. Can your pilots manage that? Rakuan exchanged a look with his senior officers, then nodded slowly. We can manage it. Barely. But understand. Your power has been inconsistent since you arrived. If it fails you mid-strike against 6 capital ships in the vacuum of space. I know the risk, Superman said. I've felt the fluctuations, but I've also felt them stabilizing these past few days. And I won't let uncertainty be the reason this planet burns. If I falter, your pilots pull back and regroup. That's the contingency. The battle began at dawn, twin suns rising behind a curtain of anti-aircraft fire as Republic gunships screamed skyward to meet the descending wave of droid landing craft. Superman launched himself into the exosphere alongside them, the atmosphere thinning and then vanishing entirely around him as he crossed into the cold vacuum of space. For the first time since his arrival, a sensation both achingly familiar and disorientingly foreign beneath an alien sun's light. The first Lucrehulk battleship loomed before him, a vast wheel of gray metal bristling with turbolaser batteries that swiveled. To track his approach, he moved faster than their targeting systems could compensate, weaving between crimson bolts of turbolaser fire that would have vaporized a Republic starfighter and struck the ship's hull with both fists extended, punching through layers of reinforced durasteel like a diver breaching still water. Inside, he found the reactor core exactly where Republic intelligence had predicted, and with a surge of strength that felt, for the first time since Presetlin, entirely, gloriously his own, he tore the containment housing apart and hurled the destabilizing core out into open space, clear of the ship, clear of any chance of catastrophic backlash toward the planet below. He repeated the process at the second ship, then the third, his body beginning to ache in ways it rarely did, sweat beating despite the vacuum's cold, but his power holding steady, strengthening even, as though the sheer act of purposeful defiance were feeding something deeper than solar radiation alone. By the fourth ship, droid fighters had begun concentrating fire on him directly, a storm of crimson bolts that stung and scorched but could not stop him. By the fifth, his vision had begun to blur with exhaustion he'd never experienced in a decade of heroism, every strike costing more than the last. The sixth ship's captain, a Neimoidian growing increasingly desperate, ordered ion cannons redirected from ground bombardment to full defensive fire, a barrage that finally staggered Superman mid-flight, sending him tumbling end over end through the void, vision fracturing into static, strength guttering like a candle in wind. For one terrifying moment, spinning through the cold dark above a world he'd known for barely 2 weeks, he thought he understood, finally and completely, what it meant to be breakable. Then, from somewhere below, he felt it, not the Force, not quite, but something adjacent to it, an entire garrison of clone troopers and Republic pilots, refusing to break formation despite overwhelming odds, buying him precious seconds through sheer collective will. And Amley's voice, faint but steady through his calm, reminding him that he wasn't alone in this fight, whatever else was true. He stopped tumbling. He turned back toward the sixth ship, exhaustion burning through every fiber of his body, and flew directly into the heart of the ion cannon barrage that had nearly ended him. The sixth Lucrehulk's reactor core detonated in a silent flash of white light, visible even from the surface of Presetlin as a brief, brilliant star blooming and dying in the upper atmosphere. When the debris finally cleared, Republic sensor operators confirmed what seemed impossible: 6 capital ships neutralized, their droid armies falling lifeless mid-stride as Central Command signals cut out, and a single figure in a tattered, scorched cape drifting slowly back down through the atmosphere under his own power, battered but alive. The garrison's cheer, when it came, was unlike anything Superman had heard since his arrival, not the disciplined acknowledgement of soldiers following protocol, but something rawer, more human, echoing across comm channels and rooftops, alike as clone troopers who had spent 3 years watching this war grind their brothers into statistics allowed themselves, for one unguarded moment, to believe they might actually win it. He landed in the shattered plaza to find Amley waiting, relief and something more complicated warring across her features. "You shouldn't have survived that," she said quietly, gripping his shoulder as though needing physical proof he was solid and real. "Neither should this garrison have held as long as it has," Superman replied, voice hoarse with an exhaustion that went deeper than muscle fatigue. "Seems we're both in the business of exceeding expectations, but 6-star systems away, in the ornate, shadowed confines of a private, Coruscant chamber that officially did not exist on any Senate blueprint. The destruction of an entire separatist fleet registered not as tragedy, but as data, fascinating, valuable data, filtered through the calm, patient mind of a being far more dangerous than Count Dooku had ever been. Darth Sidious had been observing the reports from Presetlin with quiet, growing interest since the stranger's first appearance. As Supreme Chancellor Palpatine, he received General Rakuan's official battle reports with practiced concern. As Sidious, in the privacy of his own considerations, he had spent every spare hour parsing what this anomaly meant. For the delicate architecture of a war he had spent years constructing with exacting precision. A being of near limitless physical power, invulnerable to conventional weaponry, capable of single-handedly destroying capital ship battle groups, and, crucially, entirely disconnected from the force's natural flow. A variable his careful predictions had never accounted for. Where Dooku saw an asset to seduce, Sidious recognized something far more dangerous. An element capable of unbalancing every calculation he had made regarding the war's trajectory, the eventual triumph of the empire he intended to build from its ashes, the systematic destruction of the Jedi Order he had spent decades engineering. He summoned Dooku via secure hologram that evening, the Count's projection flickering to life within the chamber's shadowed confines. "Your negotiation with the Kryptonian failed," Sidious said, not a question. "He is more principled than I anticipated," Dooku admitted, his composure carefully maintained despite the admission of failure. "And more perceptive. He recognized the separatist cause as merely another flavor of tyranny, however elegantly I framed it. Then we adjust our approach." Sidious's hooded projection paced slowly within its holographic confines, calculation evident in every measured movement. A being motivated by principle rather than power is not immune to manipulation, Count, merely resistant to the crude manipulations you offered him. Principle can be weaponized as effectively as ambition, given sufficient patience and the right pressure applied in the right places. You have something specific in mind. I have several considerations. Sidious's voice carried the particular satisfaction of a strategist several moves ahead of his opponent. First, this creature's power appears tied to solar exposure, a vulnerability, however narrow. Second, he has already displayed troubling sympathy toward the clone soldier's plight, a fault line that could prove useful in ways neither the Republic nor he yet appreciates. Third, and most crucially, he paused, allowing the weight of the revelation to settle. He has demonstrated a fundamental unwillingness to kill, even when facing existential threats. A being who will not cross that line, however powerful, can always be maneuvered into positions where his own restraint becomes his undoing. Dooku's projection remained silent for a long moment, absorbing the strategic implications. "You intend to use him against the Jedi somehow, or against the Republic itself?" "I intend," Sidious said, "to ensure that whatever role he plays in this war ultimately serves purposes he cannot yet perceive. Every hero requires a stage, Count Dooku, and every stage can be constructed to produce whatever ending the architect desires. Continue engaging him directly if you wish. It costs us little, and it keeps him occupied while more important pieces move into position. But do not mistake his moral clarity for weakness. It is, if anything, his most exploitable asset. And if he proves impossible to maneuver, if his convictions hold regardless of what pressure we apply." Sidious's projection went very still, and even across the vast distance separating Coruscant from wherever Dooku currently stood, the Count felt the weight of something ancient and patient settle across the connection. Then he becomes a variable requiring elimination rather than manipulation. Sidious said simply, "Every being has a breaking point. Count Dooku, I have spent decades discovering the breaking points of Jedi Masters far more disciplined than a stranger, barely 3 weeks removed from his own galaxy. I do not anticipate this Kryptonian proving the exception to that pattern. I merely require patience to discover precisely where his particular fracture line lies." The hologram dissolved, leaving Dooku alone in the quiet hum of his flagship's private chamber, turning over Sidious's words with the calculating patience of a man who had spent decades serving darker purposes than his public rhetoric ever revealed. Somewhere below, on a battered world still celebrating an impossible victory, a being from beyond the stars slept for the first time in weeks, unaware that his greatest test had not yet arrived, and that the architect of his coming trial was not Count Dooku at all, but a far more patient, far more dangerous mind. Already 3 steps ahead in a game Superman did not yet know he was playing. 2 weeks after the destruction of the Separatist fleet, the war found a new shape, one that would test not Superman's strength, but the very boundaries of what his body could endure. General Grievous arrived at Presentlands, neighboring system with a force unlike anything the garrison had faced before. A mobile weapons platform, salvaged from ancient separatist research into force-based technology, capable of generating and channeling raw force lightning through a massive Kyber crystal amplification array. It was an abomination of Sith and separatist engineering both. Built specifically, Superman would later learn, on intelligence. Sidious had quietly fed toward Dooku's research division under the guise of routine weapons development. The platform's first test came at the border settlement of Reva's Landing, where Superman arrived, mid-evacuation to find civilians fleeing a weapon he had never encountered before, arcs of crackling purple-white energy tearing through durasteel barricades and organic flesh alike with equal, horrifying efficiency. He had weathered blaster fire, ion cannons, even the crushing vacuum of space. He was entirely unprepared for what happened when the platform's primary array turned toward him directly. The lightning struck him mid-flight, and for the first time since his arrival in this galaxy, Superman screamed. It was not merely pain. He had endured pain before, had learned in recent weeks that this galaxy possessed weapons capable of stinging where Earth's could not touch him. This was different. The force lightning seemed to reach past his skin entirely, past muscle and bone, into something more fundamental, the strange, still recalibrating relationship between his cells and the energy that sustained them. He felt his strength gutter like a snuffed candle, felt himself falling from the sky for the second time in this galaxy. And this time, there was no reserve of purposeful defiance waiting to catch him. He struck the ground hard enough to crater the earth and did not immediately rise. Anli reached him first, sprinting through crossfire with a recklessness that violated every tactical principle she'd ever been taught, throwing herself between his prone form and the advancing line of B-2 droids, her lightsaber a blur of desperate defense. "Get up, Clark," she said, voice tight with something between command and plea. "I can't hold this line alone." He forced himself upright through sheer stubbornness, vision swimming, every nerve still singing with residual agony. The weapons platform was already recalibrating for a second strike. Its crew, organic separatist technicians rather than droids, Superman noted grimly, working with the calm efficiency of soldiers who had rehearsed this exact scenario. "That weapon," he said, forcing the words through gritted teeth. "It's not just force lightning. There's something else in it, something that reaches deeper than the blaster fire ever has." "Kyber crystal amplification," Anli said, deflecting a volley of blaster bolts back toward their source. "It's ancient Sith technology, twisted into something new. It doesn't just channel dark energy, it disrupts the fundamental balance of whatever it strikes, force-sensitive or not." Which meant, Superman realized with mounting dread, that his still unstable relationship with this galaxy's solar energy made him uniquely vulnerable to exactly this kind of disruption, a fracture line Sidious had apparently identified before Superman had even understood it himself. The platform fired a second time, and this time Superman was ready, diving beneath the primary arc rather than attempting to weather it directly. Feeling the lightning sear past close enough to leave his cape smoking at the edges, he closed the distance at a speed that strained every fiber of his exhausted body, reaching the platform's outer hull as the crew scrambled to redirect their weapon toward this closer, more immediate threat. What followed was not the clean, decisive victory of the fleet battle 2 weeks prior. It was a desperate, grinding struggle, Superman tearing through the platform's outer defenses while absorbing glancing strikes that left him staggering, vision fracturing, every strike costing more than the last. He thought, in the chaos of it, of Ridge's words atop the comm tower. "You got the luxury of that choice." He thought of the separatist technicians inside the platform, organic beings following orders in a war that had made monsters of circumstance rather than nature, people he could not simply crush, without becoming something he refused to be. Even now, even exhausted, and burning with pain that made every rational calculation feel impossibly distant, he tore into the platform's primary generator instead of its crew compartment, redirecting every ounce of remaining strength into destroying the machine rather than the people operating it, a choice that cost him precious seconds, precious margin. as the platform's death throes discharge caught him directly at point blank range in one final, devastating burst. He did not remember losing consciousness. He remembered only Anley's voice, distant and fading, and the strange, vertiginous sensation of falling through smoke toward ground that seemed impossibly far away. He woke hours later in the garrison's medical bay, body wrapped in back-to-soaked bandages despite his accelerated healing. Anley sitting vigil beside his cot with an expression that suggested she had not moved in some time. "The platform's destroyed," she said quietly, before he could ask. "Reva's landing held. You saved them, Clark. But you frightened me badly today. I've never seen you fall like that." "Neither have I," Superman admitted, voice raw. "That weapon, it found something in me I didn't know was breakable. Something Dooku's people clearly went looking for." Anley's expression darkened with a thought she did not immediately voice. "Not Dooku," she said finally. "This weapon required intelligence too precise, too perfectly calibrated to your specific vulnerabilities, for it to be the Count's design alone. Someone else identified your fracture point, Clark. Someone patient enough to let Dooku take the credit while pulling strings from somewhere far more hidden." Outside the medical bay, twin suns rose over a garrison that had survived another day. But Superman lay in the dim light considering, for the first time with real dread, that his greatest enemy in this galaxy might not be Grievous or Dooku or even the separatist cause itself, but a mind far more patient, watching from shadows he had not yet learned to perceive. Superman's recovery took 4 days, longer than any injury he could remember healing from, a fact that unsettled him more than the pain itself had. By the time he returned to active duty, General Rakuan's garrison had received new orders that would test him in a way no weapon, however devastating, ever could. President campaign had drawn the attention of Republic High Command, and with attention came reinforcement, a full legion under the command of Jedi General Pong Krell, dispatched to consolidate the sector's gains and press the advantage. Superman's intervention had won. Krell arrived with the bearing of a man accustomed to victory and entirely unaccustomed to explaining his methods. His four-armed, elongated frame moving through the garrison's command chamber, like a predator assessing new territory. "So you're the anomaly everyone's been reporting," Krell said, studying Superman with cold, assessing eyes. "Good. I have use for anomalies. Reconnaissance reports indicate a separatist supply depot fortified beyond conventional assault capacity. You'll spearhead the strike. I'd want to understand the operation before agreeing to lead it." Superman replied evenly, already sensing something wrong in the Jedi General's manner. A hardness that felt less like battle-forged, pragmatism, and more like something curdled. "You'll understand what I tell you to understand," Krell said, dismissing the objection with casual authority. "Command structure exists for a reason, stranger. I don't debate tactics with assets, however impressive their combat statistics." Over the following days, Superman watched Krell's command style with mounting alarm, clone troopers sent into positions that seemed to prioritize speed over survival, tactical decisions that cost lives with a carelessness that felt deliberate, rather than merely ruthless. Ridge, when Superman finally cornered him privately, confirmed what he'd begun to suspect. "Casualty rates have tripled since Krell took command," Ridge said, voice low with barely restrained fury. "He treats us like we're disposable, because to him, we are. Some of the men are saying he's not even fighting for the Republic's reasons anymore, just fighting to fight." The breaking point came during the depot assault itself. Krell had ordered 2 full squads, including Ridge's, into a direct frontal assault against fortified droid positions, a tactic so transparently costly that Anley openly questioned it over comm before the operation even began. Superman, positioned to provide aerial support, watched in mounting horror as Krell's strategy unfolded exactly as it had been designed to, not to minimize casualties, but seemingly to maximize them. Clone troopers cut down in staggering numbers against defenses that a more patient approach could have circumvented entirely. "Pull them back," Superman said over comm, voice tight with barely controlled fury. "This is slaughter, not strategy. You will maintain position and continue your assigned function." Krell replied coldly, "The objective requires sacrifice. That is the nature of war. whatever sentimentality your origin has instilled in you. Superman looked down at the battlefield, at Ridge's squad, pinned and dying beneath. Droid fire that Krell's tactics had delivered them into, and made a decision that would define everything that followed. He broke formation. He tore through the droid line with a fury he'd rarely allowed himself. Indifferent now to Krell's authority, focused entirely on reaching the pinned squad before the last of them fell. He arrived in time to save 6 of the original 14, carrying wounded troopers clear of the killing field 2 and 3, at a time while droid fire scorched the air around him, Krell's furious commands crackling uselessly over comm channels. Superman had simply stopped acknowledging. When the smoke cleared and the depot finally fell, taken, ultimately, through Superman's direct intervention rather than Krell's original strategy, the Jedi generals' fury was volcanic. "You disobeyed direct orders," Krell snarled, looming over Superman in the depot's captured command center, his forearms crossed with barely restrained violence. "Those men died because you compromised the operation's tactical integrity." "Those men died," Superman replied, voice dangerously quiet, "because you sent them into a slaughter you knew they couldn't survive. I've been watching your casualty numbers, General. I've been listening to soldiers who trusted you to value their lives. And you've spent their trust like currency you never intended to honor." Anley stepped between them before their survival. "If Republic Command wants my continued cooperation, they'll need to guarantee it doesn't come at the cost of watching men like Ridge die for a general who sees them as expendable." Word of the confrontation reached Republic High Command within hours, alongside independent testimony from surviving squad members corroborating Superman's account of Krell's tactics. What followed was not the disciplinary action against Superman that Krell had confidently predicted, but a formal investigation into the Jedi General's command record, an investigation that would, months later, reveal a pattern of deliberately costly engagements stretching back years, evidence of a mind already fractured by darker influences than anyone in the garrison had yet perceived. But that resolution lay in the future, in the immediate aftermath, standing in a captured depot surrounded by soldiers who had watched him choose their lives over blind obedience to command structure. Superman understood with sudden, aching clarity that his time in this galaxy had changed him as much as he had changed it, that the absolutist certainties he'd arrived with had given way to something more complicated, more hard-won, and ultimately more honest. The weeks following Krell's removal brought a strange, fragile quiet to Presentland, not peace, for the Clone Wars ground on across 1,000 other systems, but a localized stillness that felt, for the first time since his arrival, like something Superman might call home. Republic High Command, chastened by the investigation's early findings, granted General Rakuan's garrison expanded autonomy, and with it, an unspoken acknowledgement that the stranger who refused to be anyone's weapon had earned the right to define his own role in their war. He used that freedom carefully. He continued fighting alongside Battalion 7, but on terms he'd negotiated directly with Rakuan, no engagements that treated clone lives as expendable currency, no operations he hadn't personally reviewed, for the kind of reckless calculus that had defined Krell's brief, devastating command. He spent his remaining strength not just on the battlefield, but in the quieter work of rebuilding, shoring up Presentland's shattered infrastructure, ensuring the wounded had proper care, sitting with clone troopers in the evenings as Ridge taught him the particular dark humor soldiers used to survive wars they never chose. Dooku made one final approach, weeks later, via encrypted transmission, rather than in-person negotiation, a last attempt to woo the stranger toward separatist sympathies now that his disillusionment with certain Republic command structures had become galaxy-wide knowledge. Superman declined without hesitation, informing the Count that recognizing corruption within an institution was not the same as embracing its enemies, a distinction Dooku's philosophy had never quite managed to accommodate. Sidious, watching from the shadows of his dual identity, filed the Kryptonian away as an unresolved variable, not defeated, not converted, but stubbornly, inconveniently consistent in ways that would require patience beyond even his considerable capacity to eventually unravel. For now, the architect of galaxy-spanning war turned his attention back toward grander designs, content to let the stranger believe he had won a victory that was, in truth, merely a postponement. Anley found Superman one final evening, atop the same ruined comm tower, where their friendship had first taken shape, watching twin suns bleed color across a horizon that no longer felt entirely alien. "You could stay," she said quietly. "Whatever tier brought you here, whatever way home you're searching for, Presentland would have you. The garrison would have you. I would have you, if that means anything." "It means everything," Superman said, and meant it fully. "But I have a world of my own still waiting, whenever the way back reveals itself. People who love me, who I promised to protect, whose faces I still see when I close my eyes." He looked toward her, something gentle and grateful in his expression. "But this galaxy taught me something I don't think I could have learned anywhere else, that heroism isn't about clean answers or certain victories. It's about choosing again and again, even when every choice costs something." She nodded, understanding written across features that had grown, over these weeks, unexpectedly dear to him. "Then whatever comes next, Kal-El of Krypton, may the Force go with you, wherever it finally sends you." He never did find his way home through any conventional means. The tear that brought him to this galaxy remained as mysterious as the day it opened, and those scientists, and Jedi scholars alike would, study its lingering traces for months afterward. No clear answer ever emerged. But 3 months into his time in the Clone Wars, standing beside Ridge and Anley and General Rakoan on a Presentland finally, fully liberated from separatist threat, a second tier opened without warning above the same battle-scarred plaza where he'd first arrived, as sudden and inexplicable as the first, pulling at the edges of reality with a gravity he recognized instinctively as belonging to home. He looked back once, at soldiers who had become brothers, at a Jedi who had become something rarer still, at a world he had helped save without ever fully belonging to it. "Thank you," he said simply, "for showing me what it means to fight in a war without easy answers." Then he was gone, pulled back through the tear toward a yellow sun and a city called Metropolis, leaving behind a galaxy forever changed by 3 months of impossible presence. A garrison that would tell his story for generations. A Sith Lord filing away lessons for calculations yet to come. And a Jedi Knight who would spend the rest of her life watching twin suns set, wondering if somewhere among the stars, a man in a red cape still remembered her. In the end, Superman's time in the Clone Wars resolved nothing about the galaxy's deeper conflicts. Separatists and Republics still ground against each other. Sidious's schemes still unfolded in shadow, and the war's ultimate tragedy still awaited its historical conclusion. But for one battered world and the soldiers who fought to defend it, his 3 months among the stars proved that even an outsider bound by no galactic law could choose to matter, could refuse easy answers, and could leave behind something more lasting than victory. The memory of a being who insisted, against every complication this galaxy offered, that some principles were worth holding even when the cost was uncertain. Somewhere beyond the reach of any hyperspace lane, a man named Clark Kent returned to his own sky, forever changed by suns that were never his, and somewhere among the ruins of Presentland, his legend had only just begun.